welcome back to our Harkla YouTube channel. Welcome if this is your first time. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Jessica. We are the Certified Occupational Therapy Assistants with Harkla, and today we're going to talk about which primitive reflex to address first.
A very common question we get inside of our course, on social media, in the comments here is, how do I know which primitive reflex to assess or to integrate first? Now, we really focus on two specific components here because every child is unique, obviously. So we want to make sure we are addressing each child in a way that's going to be the most beneficial for them.
The first way that you can go about it is to address the retained primitive reflexes in a developmental order. In infancy, the primitive reflexes naturally integrate as certain developmental milestones are reached, and they go in a specific order that helps the infant and the toddler reach these developmental milestones and progress through and develop and grow.
I actually just wanted to say really quick, there's a book called The Symphony of Reflexes, and I just love how it explains this specific component as a symphony. It's just like different parts of the orchestra and the band are all coming in and making the whole developmental process work efficiently.
And they all rely on each other. That's the other piece here, is when you are addressing primitive reflexes in a developmental order, you are integrating them the way that I guess you could say nature intended, and they play off of each other. So specifically, the TLR must integrate before the STNR can even emerge and then integrate. So the first way that we always recommend to address primitive reflexes is in a developmental order, which is going to start with the Moro reflex. And that is the reflex you will start with, and you will start with completing those exercises for the Moro reflex and work on integrating that one first.
But let's say the child has an integrated Moro reflex, so you don't really need to work on that one, even though it is the first reflex that we would address. Then you'd move on to the next reflex. So let's say the TLR is the reflex that is unintegrated. You'd work on that one first if their Moro reflex is integrated, because that's the next reflex in that specific developmental pattern. And you'd carry on in that way, working on one reflex at a time as soon as it's integrated.
The second option is to address the primitive reflexes that are having the biggest impact on the child's life. So when you are testing their retained primitive reflexes, you're going to see that there's probably a couple of reflexes that are more retained than others. And so you might look at using a checklist as well, and having the family fill out a checklist that identifies specific areas of daily life where the child is struggling in relation to specific primitive reflexes. And then you can kind of look at both the checklist and your testing results and say, okay, it looks like the child is being impacted the most by a retained ATNR. So that's the one we're going to work on first.
And it's not necessarily that we're going out of order. It's more of like, holy cow, this reflex is so retained and they are not functioning in school at all. So we need to focus on this reflex to help them be more successful, because chances are, if you don't start with that one that's really like a level 4 is how we're testing them, if we don't address that reflex first, then we probably won't even be successful with integrating any of the other reflexes. So that's why it's so specific to each child, and really figuring out a specific protocol for each child in order to make it make sense.
Yeah. So for example, I recently tested one of my clients at the clinic, and this child scored a 1 on the Moro reflex, a 2 or a 3 on the TLR, and then a 4 or 5 on the ATNR and the STNR. So looking at this child and looking at their daily life, looking at the test results, we're actually not going to start with the Moro reflex for this specific child or the TLR. We're actually going to start with the ATNR and the STNR, because those ones are having a bigger impact on this child's life. But again, this was very individualized. It's a child I've been working with for a while, and looking at the whole picture, we were able to come up with that treatment plan.
So knowing this information, we generally will recommend working on a reflex, working on integrating a reflex for a minimum of 30 days. Sometimes 30 days is enough to really kickstart it into gear. Sometimes it takes longer, and that's okay, specific to the child. So it makes us really nervous to say, oh, integrate your child's primitive reflexes in 30 days. Like, that's really sketchy because every child is so unique. So just keep in mind that's a general rule of thumb when you're integrating these reflexes. Complete those activities for a minimum every day for 30 days.
Yeah. And finally, one thing we want to leave you with is just to keep in mind that the primitive reflexes may never fully integrate. Really, the goal when we're working on primitive reflex integration is to get the child to a place where they are feeling good and confident in their body, they're coordinating their movements, they're having success and independence in all of their daily life activities. And if we can get the primitive reflexes to a place where they're able to do all of that, even if the reflexes aren't 100% integrated, that's what we want to aim for.
Yep. So with that, if you are a parent watching this or a caregiver and you're like, I am so concerned about my child's primitive reflexes, step one is to find an OT practitioner, sometimes even chiropractors who are trained,
Or PTs
as well. There's a lot of different areas that work on primitive reflex integration, but find a practitioner who specializes in reflexes, get an evaluation, and start working on in-person therapy. But we know that obviously isn't possible for everyone, so if you are looking for a way to test and integrate these reflexes at home, then we'll put a link to our free webinar, our digital course, in the description below, so that way you can check it out and you can learn how to do these things at home.
If you are a therapist or a professional working with children, we highly, highly recommend you take our digital course where you learn the ins and outs of primitive reflexes and how to help your clients. If you are an OT practitioner, you can earn continuing education through AOTA as well. If you found this video helpful, we would love to hear from you. Leave us a comment. Make sure you click the like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We drop a new video every Tuesday.
Come hang out with us on Instagram. You can find us at Harkla_family, as well as All Things Sensory Podcast.
And make sure you're listening to our podcast, All Things Sensory. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
And with that, we will plan on seeing you next week for another video.
Okay, bye.
Action.
To talk. Try again. Pause. Hold. Damn. Impact.